Okay, we're continuing the third shir in the Sefer Otzrot Chayim, Drush Adam Kadmoin, which appears in the Eitz Chayim itself, Shar Aleph at the end of Anav Beis. So the Ri now is beginning to speak about the Tzimtzum. And he says, V'has Tzimtzum Atzmoi, Be'emtza Or Shaloi, because both contracted himself from the very middle, the center of the Or, but the Kulas HaMelkos HaMtzoy Shaboy, in the center of the Ri understands is an imaginary circle, a conceptual circle. But Tzimtzum Atzmo El Asvivois Vatstodav Nisha Chalo Ben Asayim. So therefore the Or now exists on the circumference, right? He also uses Stodim. Maybe Stodim is referring to a square or rectangle, but the understanding is the circumference of whatever two-dimensional object we're dealing with. V'nishal Chalo Ben Asayim. So we have a space, right? The Or now is contracted to the circumference, to the boundary of this this whatever geometric object this is. Without loss of generality, we call it a circle. So it's contracted to the circumference of the circle. V'nishal Chalo Ben Asayim. We have an empty space within it. This is the first symptom of the matzil. And like I explained before, the notion of tzimtzum is actually not a one-time event, but actually in the entire shtalshelus, in the declension of worlds, whenever we go from a higher world to a lower world, there's always a type of tzimtzum. We'll see this in Yitzhak Hashem. Okay? Now, v'zeh mokum chalo, so this area, this empty middle of the circle, right, the area within the circle, hu metzias chalal ogel echad b'shaveh. In other words, it's the middle of the circle, the area of the circle, right? So there's the middle of the area of the round circle, inside the circle. So when he says, be called stadav, right? In other words, shava, be called stadav, it means that basically that the Or Ein Sof appears equal from all areas of the circle. And as we explained, this has to do with the fact that now the Or Ein Sof, before it now re-enters into the Chalo, remains dimensionless, or at least one less dimension. So that requires that things be what's called isotropic. That's the proper expression to use. Okay? Right? So basically what's going to happen is that eventually all the worlds, right, are going to be contained within this circle. And he says, Nimtza Olam Atzilis v'chol Olamos. The Olam Atzilis, Olamas, are going to be within this Chalal. Now, why does he mention Atzilis? Well, Atzilis is actually, perhaps we can speak about that as being the first world, even though we'll see that actually there's Adam coming before that. But the Ika Kabbalah of the Ari is concerned with Atzilis. Like we explained before, the purpose of man is to masaken the Atzilis. The Kabbalah of the Ari is basically concerned with the mechanism by which man is masaken the Atzilis. The other worlds, which are the Olamas HaPilut, Bria, Yitzira, Asiya, they only come about only after the Shvira Sakela. This is a very important point to mention. Even in the Rashash too, in the Nahal Shalom, he says that basically the other worlds are not really even worlds. They're sort of like he uses an interesting lashon that they're sort of like they're remnants of the Malchus. The Kabbalah of the Ari is the Kabbalah of Atzilus. Now. And the whole purpose of the Olamas HaPirud, which are the physical worlds, Bria, Tzia, and Asiya, each world becoming increasingly physical, are just basically to restore those things, the Shivrei Kelim, which fell from the Atzilus, but at the very end, of course, it will only be, of course, Atzilus. Now, you should know that, this is not where I want to discuss this, but you should know that if you look in the Kabbalah of the Ramchal, especially in the Sefer HaKlolim, you'll see that the Ramchal took a different point of view. For the Ramchal, milachatchila, not only did HaKadosh Baruch Hu create worlds of Pirud, Bria, Yitzia, Asiya, but actually the tikkun, which takes place in history, takes place in two stages. There's first a actual tikkun of the olam hasapirut, the physical worlds, and after that there's a tikkun of olam hatzilus. But for the Ramchal, the purpose of man is actually to mesaken the olam hasapirut, and that's where actually the notion of Ra becomes an important concept in the Kabbalah of the Ramchal. But in the Ari, we don't, in fact, actually see any notion, nor is there any purpose in being mesaken the physical worlds, but just to bring the physical worlds which were created as a result of the Shvira, to bring them back to Atzilus. So that's why the Ari, in my opinion, here points at Atzilus, but he says the other worlds too. So using this isotropic metaphor, geometrical metaphor of the Ari, we have the world which are contained within the halal, within the inside, the inside of the circle, and the Or Ein Sof is makif equally, which means the Or Ein Sof constitutes what's called the circumference of this world, which constitutes the ontology of man's understanding of reality. Now he says, when the Kadosh Baruch Hu contracted himself, so from one point, right, on the circumference, which means from one place, so he directed the Or Ein Sof, the light, to re-enter into the circle, derech kav echad, through one line, straight, dak, very thin, ke'ein sino echad. So you have a re-entrance from the circumference into the circle through a thin line, right? Ke'ein sino echad, or hanimshach min ha'ein sof. So you have or, light that comes from the Ein Sof, which is on the circumference, right? And what you're doing is you're being mamshech, you're letting or re-enter into the inside of the circle, right, through a very, very thin tube. And that's called the kav. Al toch hachala, mamali yisai. And therefore the or which goes through this kav, right, go through this tube, is eventually going to fill up or refill the halal. Aval nisha mokum poni ben or shebetoich za halal, or ben or ha'ein sof ha'makas halal hazeh, right? Kaniska, right? But says the Ari, there has to be a mokum poni, a discontinuity between the or that's in the halal and between the or of the Ein Sof, which is makif, which is on the perimeter of the halal, right? As he says, as I explained, right? Because if you don't have if there isn't going to be a gap between the or in the halal, right, and between the or that's makif and the Ein Sof on the perimeter of the halal, so basically we go back to square one. Basically the entire Ein Sof will basically refill the circle. What's going to happen is the or of the Ein Sof is going to rejoin with any or that's in the halal, and by rejoining, so therefore we're back to everything is or pashut Ein Sof, and we're back to pre-tzimtzum. Okay. So what's interesting is that even though we have a little bit of a paradox, which we want to speak about, for sure the kav is coming from the circumference, from the or makif, the or Ein Sof, from the circumference into the halal. But now when this or is going to express itself and create olamais, the kav has to, in fact, actually create a greater than zero distance between the or hamakif and between any other olamais, as we're going to see that are created as a result of the or Ein Sof in the kav, because there has to be a distinct discontinuity between the or on the circumference of the circle and all other oiros, all other lights that constitute the Eilamis, which are created within the area of the circle. So we have over here an interesting thing. The finite distance, the greater than equal distance, greater than epsilon of the kav, doesn't in a certain sense really count as an oilam. When the kav is now going to, either it's going to be misagil, it's going to go in a circle, right? Or it's going to create oilamos, but there has to be this finite distance between or Ein Sof on the circumference and between all worlds that emerge from the kav. And this, in fact, actually is I guess you would call it, this is the nes, this is the fundamental notion of creation, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu remains, in this sense, separate from his creation, and at least conceptually, and by that, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu is able to, in fact, create this God-man dimension, and therefore we fulfill the purpose of creation. Okay, so I think we'll stop over here, and we will actually go a little bit deeper into this in Mitzvah Shem in the next year.